All right, welcome everyone.
And welcome to session 49. Let's jump right into it. In our last session, 48, we got kind of KH's ideas and follow-up information about the HX letter that was published in the Theosophist. We covered a lot of information about how Mahatmas operate, and it's quite interesting. We also found out that the Mahatmas, including the Mahachohan, did not want to break with Hume despite his nastiness, and they gave the reason that he could still be saved, and that was true. They wanted to make every possible effort, and they do that with all of their chelas and potential chelas. They are infinitely patient. They never try to exact retribution for any actions that the chela or probational chela may do. And if they do have to break for a period of time, it's not forever, as we've said. It might be for a long time. It could be 20, 30 years, could be for an entire lifetime. But they never give up until that person is irredeemably lost. Another reason that they didn't want to break with him, I believe, is that they were smart enough that they wanted the break to come from him. Because if they cut him off, guess what he would do?
Of course, slander them for sure.
So that obviously was another consideration. Let him be the one to make the decision, and then he can't blame us.
And they're more patient anyway, and they would be willing to wait.
Yeah.
He's the one that would be more likely to have a temper and break the connection.
Exactly. And they know human nature.
Human nature.
And he made that joke before. Hume thinks he is the main reason that humanity exists. It was named for him, after all. So that's another reason they didn't want to break with him. We also found out that adepts don't always act as adepts.
That was a good one.
Sometimes they're just humans. But it also, while I was thinking about it, gave me the idea that this is a major reason why one of them has to be on watch at all times. Because remember that KH said that he was completely unaware that one of his top chelas, DK, had smashed his nose into a low beam when he didn't put the proper filter in place when he was operating as a chela who has certain cities. And so he forgot the process. And KH was unaware that he had made his nose bleed and possibly broken his nose.
So he was aware. KH was aware.
No, he only found out later. He was telling us that because he wasn't in adept mode, he was not aware of it when it happened. But he obviously found out later. Several times they've talked about someone being on watch. And we've said before that that is sometimes because of those who are in the outer world. They have to be very carefully watched for several reasons. But it also shows us that if they don't have someone on watch at all times, anything could happen to one of their chelas and they would be unaware of it. Now, some of their higher chelas are given the tools that they need to contact their master at any time. And they only give that to the chelas that they know would never ever bother them with unnecessary interruptions. It's very carefully given out, obviously. We also found out that they were forbidden to use their Mahatmic powers in their conversations or communications with the two Englishmen, and it was due completely to Hume's actions. So that had been cut off. And now he could only interact with them as a human being.
This is strictly in regards to how the actual letters are transmitted, though.
Well, not just the transmission, but the writing of them. He now has to write them himself. He's not allowed to transmit
Yeah.
telepathically to one of his chelas to write.
Yeah.
That would be a Mahatmic power. So he has to write the letters himself, and they're quite long. And it is all because of Hume. That was cut off. So he told Sinnett, don't fight the chains, meaning, yes, we have restrictions on us, and it's for a very good reason. So don't be like Hume. Don't fight the process if you want to make progress. We found out from the letter from the chelas that they had made lots of progress for the very reason that they follow the rules. They trust their Mahatmas, they trust their gurus, and they will do what they're told to do. We also found out that the Mahatmas have a sort of appeals court, which is quite interesting. Obviously, it's not so much about someone complaining about them, but if they have questions about, well, am I doing this right? Am I being fair to this person? KH went to this person who was filling the role of an appellate judge and presented his case. He said, look, these guys are very unhappy with me. Am I in the wrong here? And the judge, who was a very high adept, said, well, I can certainly understand their concerns, and yes, you could do a better job of it. And so he decided he was going to put that into practice and try to take this adept's advice, which he very much admired.
This is one of those moments, Terry, where I would like to make a comparison to other traditions or people claim to be masters. Have you ever heard of an appellate court system before from a master or any other godlike being that's being presented as a godlike being or a deity or the mouthpiece for a deity? How often do they question themselves and ask for advice or help from a higher up? Never.
They claim sometimes to be getting information from a very high individual, including God in many cases. But where's the proof? Their teachings certainly don't reflect that.
And the simple fact that they don't not only not claim to be the authority here, but ask if they're doing it right. That's just amazing. That even as high as they are, they're still students.
So this again gives perceptive people insight and ammunition to believe in something. Most people believe something just because it's cool, or if I'm the only one who knows this and can share it with others, then that makes me important somehow. But these other gurus are more authoritarian. One person has the authority, and no one dares to contradict them. You notice these guys are nothing at all like that. They are interactive with their own people and seeking advice themselves and admitting that they make mistakes.
And they're very collaborative.
Yes. And even the gods that people invent, they're very authoritarian. Thus saith the Lord. And if you don't agree with it, you're going to be destroyed. Who the heck wants a God like that? I want one like these guys who actually trust the system and work with nature. We've learned a lot of things. We learned also that there were some errors, in quotation marks, in ISIS Unveiled, due to the fact that they were severely restricted on what they were allowed to teach. Two of the things they were not allowed to teach at the time ISIS was written were reincarnation, for one, and also the septenary system of the universe. And those two are very big. So you'll have to go back to the last video to see the reasons for those, why they were withheld. But those were two major teachings that they felt the Western world was not ready for. Go back to the other video and you'll find out there's a lot of really good information. So now we're at the point where we're going to discuss the contradictions that Sinnett and Hume had come up with, because they've been claiming for months now that KH contradicts himself. These were obviously written up strictly by Sinnett, but they have been talking about this between the two of them all this time because they're getting close to the end of the season where they were living in the same city in Shimla. So let's pick up with letter number 85A, which is the list of contradictions. Sinnett made a list of what he considered contradictions or possible contradictions.
That KH wrote in different letters.
And then KH wrote a different letter answering all of those and numbered them. So I'm going to read Sinnett's objections, and then interspersed between that will be the answers that KH gave him.
And this is your masterful editing. In the actual Mahatma Letters book, it's not interspersed like this.
Yes, and I should explain that he got a little bit off on the numbering, KH did, when he was answering. And at one point, he kind of gave up and started answering several questions at once, which made sense. But it made the process of trying to match them up very difficult.
The one-to-one of matching one-to-one.
So I eliminated the numbering except at the very end when he specifically mentioned two questions.
I'm going to just say one last thing because I want you, our viewers, to understand how cool this is. If you get the book, The Mahatma Letters, like I hope many of you have, it won't have much, if any, impact to read the letters separately, let alone realizing that KH's letter is in response to Sinnett's questions. Taking it further, breaking them up like this, I don't know if anyone has had the thought to do that, but this is the only way that it really can make perfect sense or get clear on the answers to Sinnett's questions. So it's so cool that we have this. So thank you for doing this. I don't know that it's ever been done.
No, it definitely has not been done in this way.
Let's see how it
works out.
Yeah.
All right. This is letter number 85A, received at Shimla in the middle of September 1882. The letter is headed Contradictions. So this is Sinnett speaking. He says, I hope you will give me great credit for obedience in having laboriously and against my inclination endeavored to compile a case for the plaintiff with regard to the alleged contradictions. As I have said elsewhere, these don't appear to me to be really worth worrying about, though for the present they leave me cloudy in my ideas about Devachan and the victims of accident. It is because they do not fret me that I have never hitherto acted on your suggestion that I should make notes of them.
This is KH's response. And it's interesting that he's still asking about Devachan and victims. We had so many letters on that, but it was very confusing. So he still thinks that there are contradictions. I don't blame him. Nor do they fret me particularly, but since they furnish our mutual friend with a good tool against us, which he is likely to use in that nasty way of his, I would rather explain them once more with your kind permission.
Hume has been inclined to trace contradictions in some letters referring to the evolution of man, but in conversation with him, I have always contended that these are not contradictions at all, but are merely due to a confusion about rounds and races, a matter of language. Then he pretended to think that you have built up the philosophy as you went and got out of the difficulty by inventing a great many more races than were contemplated at first, which I have always ridiculed as absurd.
It is absurd. Why that's absurd.
So Hume is taking a very negative approach. He's like, yeah, I think these guys are phony. I don't think they really know what they claim to know. And
they're making it up as they go.
Exactly. How brilliant would you have to be to make up a completely different philosophy of how the world was created, how human beings came to exist, the history of evolution on this planet? You would have to be really, really smart to do that. And people accused HPB of inventing these masters and the philosophy.
That's kind of a compliment to her, actually.
It is. And she basically said that. She said, if I could come up with that, then I'm probably one of the smartest people you know.
KH says, of course, it is our usual way of getting out of difficulties. So he's obviously being sarcastic. Having been invented ourselves, we repay the inventors by inventing imaginary races. There are a good many things more we are charged with having invented. Well. There's one thing, at any rate, that we can never be accused of inventing, and that is Mr. Hume himself. To invent someone like him transcends the highest city powers we know of.
Yeah, he
Sarcastic.
never loses his sense of humor.
Gosh.
All right, Sinnett says, I have not recopied here the passages about victims of accident quoted in my letter of August 12th, and in apparent conflict with the corrections on the proof of my letter on theosophy. You have already said on the back of mine, dated August 12th, I can easily understand why we are accused of contradictions and inconsistencies. Even to writing one thing today and denying it tomorrow. If you only knew how I write my letters and the time I am enabled to give to them, perchance you would feel less critical if I'm not exactly accurate.
And because I admit the apparent inconsistency, is that a reason why they should be regarded as conflicting? Suppose I had written in one letter, the moon has no atmosphere, and then told you in another letter, the moon has an atmosphere of its own. No doubt I should be accused of saying black one day and white another. But where would a Kabbalist see a contradiction in the two sentences? I assure you he would not, because a Kabbalist knows that the moon has no atmosphere corresponding in any respect to that of our earth, but one of its own, entirely different from what your men of science would call one, and knows also that we Easterners, and occultists especially, have our own ways of expressing thoughts which are as plain to us in their implied meaning as yours are to you.
And we've said before that when they're teaching their own chelas, and especially the higher chelas to whom the more hidden doctrine is revealed, they're communicating higher self to higher self on the higher mental plane, which doesn't involve words even.
Yeah.
So that's a different type of communication. And the other thing we've mentioned before is that scientists deal only with physics, with the physical world. They don't recognize that there's anything superphysical at all. It is physical, nothing else. And these guys know that there are numerous levels, not only the major levels, but intermediate sub-levels. And this is very different. So they have a much more difficult job ahead of them to try to convey this information to someone else. And the scientists have their own physical instruments, microscopes, measuring devices, and telescopes. The Mahatmas have their cities. They have their own instruments that are far better than any instruments that any scientists have.
But it's challenging to put the results into relatable data to the Western world. The cities are more powerful and more accurate, but how do you provide the results in data to us? And that's where it becomes very difficult, if not impossible.
So until they can wrap their heads around the fact that this is a completely different field, it's not just an add-on to physical science. Yes, it is in a way, but it goes so far beyond that it's almost incomprehensible. And it's definitely incomprehensible to these two Englishmen.
From a student's perspective, this is a concern that many students might have, and I'm being asked to change my worldview. I'm going to be very blunt and say I'm too literal most of the time, and I'm too brain-based, me personally, and I need to see too many physical facts, and I'm realizing how similar I am to these guys. I'm being asked to shift that way, and probably many of you are too. A lot of people in the yoga world that I am involved with are the opposite. They're too nebulous, and not enough specificity exists in their life, and they have trouble communicating also sometimes. For me, this might trigger me. The moon has no atmosphere. But then the next day, the moon has an atmosphere of its own. What we're being asked to do is stop taking everything so physically because of what Terry just said. Physical is only one small part of where these guys are living and being. It's on us to come out of that and go into where they're operating, which is so much more vast and metaphysical. So the moon has an atmosphere of its own. Well, we need to stop and contemplate that. We've mentioned this 1,000 times about how we can't just use our waking mind to understand these things. In a meditative state where we take a concept and let it evolve, that's what we call contemplation. That's where we might realize, okay, the atmosphere might not be physical. It might not even be perceptible to telescopes and microscopes, but there is something there. Well, what is this something? Well, let go of what we think and let's just expand. And then it comes that way, but it's challenging to put into words right now and understanding these. This is my own path too, on letting myself see it in a different way.
And I'm seeing it in a different way too. What a lot of people do, and I'm glad you mentioned it, there are a lot of people in the spiritual endeavors who are kind of just woo-woo.
Not factual enough or not data-driven enough. There needs to be a balance.
And these Mahatmas are scientists.
Yes.
They are occult scientists. They are brilliant. But their brilliance is so great that it's almost impossible for a genius in physical things to comprehend that greatness. What was it he said? We are victims of our own greatness or something. And it's absolutely true.
One last quick thing. I love the example that he's given because clearly it seems that it's a contradiction. The moon has no atmosphere, then it does have. This is why I believe the Mahachohan told him, yeah, you can do better. Because clearly, at face value, that's obviously a contradiction, right? So he could offer explanation. Well, okay, guys, I'm going to say something, but it's going to sound like it's contradicting. Let me explain why.
He also explained in another letter that he normally doesn't train his own chelas. It is his higher chelas, like DK, who does the training. And so he's not used to dealing with neophyte. He continues with his explanation.
Writing my letters as I do, a few lines now and a few words 2 hours later, having to catch up the thread of the same subject, perhaps with a dozen or more interruptions between the beginning and the end, I cannot promise you anything like Western accuracy. Ah, that's interesting. I have been regarded by all our Chohans as a lunatic ever since I undertook the extraordinary task of teaching two grown-up pupils with brains in which the methods of Western science had crystallized for years, one of whom is willing enough to make room for the new iconoclastic teaching, but who, nevertheless, requires a careful handling, while the other will receive nothing except on condition of grouping the subjects as he wants them to be grouped, not in their natural order. Wow, interesting. I am seriously asked by those Chohans whether or not my early association with Western palings hasn't made of me a half-pelling and turned me into a zing-zing visionary.
Okay. Pelling, we've mentioned before, is a foreigner in Tibetan. But what the heck is zing-zing? It's D-Z-I-N-G. So there's kind of a zing. And it turns out that the word zing in Tibetan is like ding, like a small bell. Ding. And what we call someone who is we call them a ding dong. So and it's the same in Tibetan. They think I'm a ding dong for trying to train these two guys in our philosophy.
That's another clue right there. The fact that his higher-ups think he's a lunatic and a ding-dong. Like, are you crazy? You're not going to get through these stubborn, thick-skulled Western. That's a clue right there.
Yeah, but guess what? 140 plus years later, some of us are getting through with the same material that he gave to these two guys and to HPB.
Okay, he continues. All this was expected, and I do not complain. I narrate a fact and humbly demand credit for the same, only hoping that it will not be mistaken again for a subtle and tricky way of getting out of a new difficulty.
Not only does he have to try to train these people, but he has to put up with their very demanding requests. And he's way more patient than I ever could be. Sinnett continues, this passage is the one which led me to think it might be that some of the earlier letters had been perhaps the victim of accident itself. And this is the quote: "Most of those whom you call candidates for Devachan die and are reborn in the Kamaloka without remembrance." And then another quote: "You can hardly call a dream of some particular scene or scenes in which you find a few persons the personal remembrance of A.P. Sinnett." So he did explain it quite well once we delved into it and sorted things out when we covered that particular letter. But they've received so much information in the meantime. And remember, Sinnett is carrying on a full-time job as editor of the Pioneer newspaper. So it's probably understandable that him trying to be a student of a completely new philosophy and having a full-time job and a family might be a little bit overwhelming.
Every just disembodied fourfold entity, whether it died a natural or a violent death, from suicide or accident, sane or insane, young or old, good, bad, or indifferent, at the instant of death loses all remembrance. It is mentally annihilated. Why does he say fourfold entity?
Because remember, he talked about the fact that when a person dies, they still have their mental ability. So
Okay,
it
just
is
disembodied. Okay, so disembodied means physical body has died. So physical and
Right.
prana are dead. Okay, I get that.
right. So he was talking about a higher quaternary and a lower triad.
I didn't realize it was after. Yeah, it does say after death, basically disembodied, because we have 7 aspects. But okay, I get it. It sleeps. It's akashic sleep in the kama loka. This state lasts from a few hours to days, weeks, months, sometimes to several years. He says akashic sleep, but really it's like a dream state. That's why it may be akashic sleep.
Right, because they're reviewing their life. And it's interesting to note that there are 3 different review periods, not so much in the Kamaloka, but remember when a person dies, one of the very final things that goes through the physical brain is a complete review of that entire life.
Flash and
Almost
flash.
instantaneous.
Like a discharge from the consciousness.
Right. So it's almost like uploading that to the Akashic records at the moment of death. Of course, it's already in the Akashic records, but it's a review for the individual who is dying. Then in the Kamaloka, he has to resolve the leftover emotional energy. But it is also a sort of start to finish review of that same emotional energy, the forces that created that. Also, it's important to keep in mind, and we've mentioned it before, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. There is a complete cycle that has subcycles within it. So when a person dies, the very first thing that happens is annihilation, just like every night you go to bed and you don't remember anything usually about the first part of your sleep. It's completely without consciousness. Same thing after you die. And then very gradually you awaken into this very strange dreamlike state, Kamaloka. And you go through that period. That can last for months, weeks, years. And then at the end of that, it gradually tapers off until you once again go into this very unconscious state. And then it goes through a metamorphosis because all of the emotional energy has been resolved. And now the person, what is left of that individual, gradually awakens in the Devachan, which is the highest part of the individual that expresses on earth. So that goes through its phases, and that one can last, for some people, 1,000 years or more. And then that eventually tapers off. So it goes through this very regular process.
And the entire thing is called bardo until the next rebirth.
Yes.
All this is according to the entity, to its mental status at the moment of death, the character of its death, etc. That remembrance will return slowly and gradually toward the end of the gestation. That's it. That's the word that we were looking for.
Gestation.
Gestation. Still more slowly. This is equivalent to like the latter part of the night, or the morning rather, when we're slowly starting to regain consciousness at 4, 5, 6 a.m., something like that. Gestation period. Yeah, that was the word. But far more imperfectly and incompletely to the shell, and fully to the ego at the moment of its entrance into Devachan. Those terms, I think, just like Sinnett said, it's the language that's confusing. We've talked about the shell 1,000 times. We've talked about the ego, but it's still confusing because they are using ego as the higher self when we in modern day use ego as the emotional self. That's why this is a little confusing.
Yeah, and that's been a major problem all along. KH didn't learn this philosophy in English. He learned it most likely in Tibetan and in Senzar. And actually above that, because at the higher mental level, you don't even need words.
Generally speaking, the shell refers to what? The higher mental.
No, that's what's left over of the Kamaloka period, the shell, because it's now empty, basically, just like the physical body died and was cast off. So now the emotional part at the end of the Kamaloka period is cast off.
That's called a shell, though?
Yeah.
Okay, I know he's talked about it 100 times. So the lower quaternary, the lower mental, astral, and I guess some prana, that's considered the shell.
Right. So at that point, it is no longer a lower triad, but now it's a higher triad. The rest of it, what used to be the lower quaternary, is now gone.
We sometimes call that the personality. It's you, it's me, it's Paul, it's Terry. We die. That part, that's why we don't remember our past lives usually, because it's gone. But the Kamaloka period is the last part of that dissolution of us. We'll call the shell the exhausted personality, I guess.
Right.
And then he's referring to ego with a capital E as the higher self. So that's the language that's confusing.
Yes. Yeah. And now it's the spiritual part, only the spiritual part.
Our soul and above.
Right.
Okay, he's saying that the process is understood imperfectly and incompletely to the shell, obviously, because there's barely any consciousness there, but it's understood fully to the higher self, he says ego, at the moment of its entrance into Devachan. Right. And now the latter, which is the higher self, being a state determined and brought by its past life, like Terry said, the higher aspects of the person expressed on earth, all the altruistic, benevolent, good deeds and loving, unconditional thoughts, that's what we're talking about here. The ego does not fall headlong, but sinks into it gradually. I'll read that sentence again. And now, the latter, being a state determined and brought by its past life, the ego, or higher self, does not fall headlong, but sinks into it gradually. He uses sink, but I'd like to think of elevating into it, like rising into it.
True.
Gradually, just like you're slowly waking up into another dream state, but it's a very different dream state. With the first dawn of that state appears that life, or rather it is once more lived by the higher self, or ego, from its first day of consciousness to its last.
So again,
a review.
Chronologically.
This is the very first time I've ever heard that, relating to the process in Devachan. This is new information to me. The Devachanic state, whether it's 5 years or 1,000 years, it's a life review of the good deeds and the positive energies that you shared and created in like a review situation, chronological.
Wow. And that's good that these guys are asking questions because we get more and more information each time.
Kamaloka and Devachan, I wonder if they really need to be chronological. Because in Kamaloka, like if you have super strong emotions in life, wouldn't those be the ones that are most prominent, regardless if they happened first or last in life?
Kamaloka may not be chronological to the same
Okay.
extent
Okay.
that Devachan is, but Devachan is most definitely chronological.
Wow, that's very different, very interesting. From the most important down to the most trifling event, all are marshaled before the spiritual eye of the ego, higher self. But unlike the events of real life, only those remain of them that are chosen by the new entity. The new entity would be what? The soul?
Well,
Higher-
the Devachanic being.
Clinging to certain scenes and actors, these remain permanently, while all the others fade away to disappear forever or to return to their creator, the shell. Okay, I need to hear that again. From the most important down to the most trifling event, all are marshaled before the spiritual eye of the ego, but unlike the events of real life, only those remain of them that are chosen. Okay, so we are able to choose which memories we dwell on and relive and experience.
Because they're only the purest of them. And the more prominent they are, the longer we're going to dwell on them.
Okay. Clinging to certain scenes and actors, these remain permanently. I don't think permanently is what he meant to say, though.
He uses the word forever and permanently to mean as long as that entity is conscious.
Okay. While all others fade away to disappear forever or to return to their creator, the shell. Wow, that's really weird. Okay.
And it's that shell that mediums can contact that they think is the individual, and it's nothing but the remnants of what used to be.
And the shell does dissipate, though. It does disintegrate.
Over time, yes.
Right. Okay.
Right. But in the meantime, elementals can come along and animate it and entertain mediums and their clients.
I'm under the impression that after Kamaloka, there is no more shell because the energy is gone.
Well, the body can be in the ground for many, many years.
That's true.
And
that's true.
The shell no longer has any life to it.
Right.
But these elementals can enliven it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Now try to understand this very important law because it's so highly just and retributive in its effects. Ooh, we're going to get a specific teaching here. Out of the resurrected past, which occurs in Devachan, nothing remains but what the ego has felt spiritually. That makes sense in Devachan. That was evolved by and through and lived over by his spiritual faculties. Okay. Whether they be love or hatred.
Yes, he has sort of mentioned this before, but now he's emphasizing it more. Hatred also has its place in Devachan. Remember, he said the only two immortal feelings are love and hatred.
All that I am now trying to describe is, in truth, indescribable. Bro.
Come on, make yourself do
it. As no two men resemble each other exactly, so no two states in Devachan are alike. Unless he is an adept who can perceive such a state in his periodical Devachan, how can one be expected to form a correct picture of that?
Yeah, exactly. You're not even sure of what's going on. Only an adept or a black magician would be aware of that. The next quote that Sinnett states, certainly the new ego, once it is reborn in the Devachan, retains for a certain time proportionate to its earth life a complete recollection of his spiritual life on earth. And the word spiritual had been added by KH previously.
Therefore, there is no contradiction in saying that the ego, once reborn in the Devachan, retains for a certain time proportionate to its earth life a complete recollection of his spiritual life on earth. Here again, only the omission of the word spiritual produced a misunderstanding.
So this was the one omission that he admitted to. Yes, I forgot to put a word in.
Yeah.
Sue me. All right. So his next quote is, All those who have not slipped down into the mire of unredeemable sin and bestiality go to the Devachan.
All those who do not slip down into the eighth sphere go to the Devachan. Where's the contradiction?
It, Devachan, is an idealized paradise of the ego's own making in each case, and by him filled with the scenery, crowded with the incidents, and thronged with the people he would expect to find in such a sphere of compensative bliss.
The Devachan state, I repeat, can hardly be described or explained by giving a graphic description, however minute, of the state of an ego taken at random, just as all the human lives collectively couldn't be described by the life of Napoleon or that of any other person. I mean, that makes sense. There are millions of various states of happiness and misery, emotional states having their source in the physical, as well as the spiritual faculties and senses, and only the latter survive.
It's kind of akin to science fiction. When writers are trying to imagine a different world or traveling through the galaxy and visiting different civilizations in other parts of our galaxy, they're just shooting in the dark. These guys are actually trying to explain things that we can hardly even imagine, that no science fiction writer would imagine. How are they going to describe that to someone?
An honest laborer will feel differently from an honest millionaire philanthropist. Florence Nightingale's state will differ considerably from that of a young bride who dies before the consummation of what she regards as happiness.
So, a bride-to-be who dies before the night of her wedding has probably been looking forward to that for a while.
I should have emphasized she, who dies before the consummation of what she regards as happiness, which would be different than Florence Nightingale's.
Yes, so that two very different.
And this makes sense,
how do you compare two lives on Earth or two lives in Devachan?
To contextualize this in a slightly different way, it's not going to be cherubs, violins, and angelic singing with white pearly buildings and gold-lined toilets. For everybody, it could be that for some people.
No streets of gold or jewels in the tree.
Right. Well, it could be that, but it's not like heaven is the same when you walk in for everybody. The two men mentioned love their families, but the philanthropist also loves humanity.
So a different type of love.
Right.
He's going to give us some really interesting examples of love.
Well, I can't wait for that. The bride centers her whole world on her future husband. Wow. Mm-hmm. The melomaniac knows of no higher state of bliss and happiness than music, the most divine and spiritual of the arts.
You knew that word, right?
No.
Melomaniac?
I know megalomaniac.
There you go.
Is this someone who is a maniac about melody?
Melomaniac is a lover of music.
Wow, I did not know that. The Devachan merges from its highest into its lowest degree by undetectable gradations, while, towards the last step of Devachan, the ego will often find itself in Avicii's faintest state.
Ooh, now this is kind of new. He hasn't mentioned this transition before.
Which, towards the end of the spiritual selection of events, the ones that we want to hang on to and experience more of, as a reward kind of, may become a bona fide Avicii.
So, obviously, it goes from the highest, most spiritual forms of love down to the basest forms of love, which would be greedy, selfish love.
Oh my God.
So love and hatred are two sides of the same coin.
Oh my goodness.
Love of humanity and love of self, or complete total selfishness, are also completely connected.
This is right now is a perfect example of a seeming contradiction that we need to contemplate. So we've said for the entire time we've been teaching together, which is like from 2009, that no hatred or ugliness or coarse vibrations can exist in Devachan. And now we're hearing that we approach the faintest state of hell. How can that be possible? Well, this is how it's possible. You got to contemplate it, please.
See, he also states that for those who are black magicians or have been black magicians, they too will go through this Devachan. But at the end of it, they will actually go into Avicii for perhaps 1,000,000 years.
This is amazing, and we have to contemplate it.
No,
Yeah.
there's so much to think about
There is.
and contemplate, meditate on.
And one of the most practical things of today's session is what you just said about how love and hate are intertwined sometimes. But we want to focus on the unconditional part of love, not the part that can...
Well, that's what we're trying to develop,
Yeah.
because that's what is going to keep us on the right-hand path.
Yes.
And there are many people, Hume being one of them, who could easily deviate and go to the left-hand path.
Yeah. My goodness. Remember, every feeling is relative. Well, unless it's unconditional. But he's right. Emotions are relative. Wow. There is neither good nor evil, happiness nor misery, per se. Oh, my goodness. I wonder if that was in Isis Unveiled, because that would have been a new concept. Like, that's karma.
I can't remember if it is specifically.
He's dropping a lot of knowledge bombs here on us.
Yes, he is.
The transcendent, evanescent bliss of an adulterer.
Pay close attention.
Transcendent, evanescent bliss of an adulterer, who by his act murders the happiness of a husband, is no less spiritually born for his criminal nature.
Wow.
So he's going to Devachan.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
no less. Wow, yeah.
So, again, the dichotomy. He is absolutely destroying another person for his own benefit, but he absolutely loves this person who is the reason that he's willing to do that. If you want to know something interesting, go online and search for the writer of the Dr. Seuss books, Theodore Geisel, I believe his name is. Find out what happened at the end of his life.
Whoa.
It's quite interesting. He, just to let you know, had an affair with his wife's best friend.
Oh, no.
And when she found out about it, she wrote a very long letter saying that she forgave him and many other things, and then she committed suicide. He married that woman, and they lived the rest of their lives together. So this pertains exactly to a situation like that.
This doesn't mean that they didn't have a horrendous time in Kamaloka, though.
No, it doesn't. Everything has to be resolved. Every energy that has been built up has to be resolved.
He probably had a hell experience in Kamaloka, and then he is owed Devachan for the positive aspects of his good nature.
Yep, exactly.
Isn't that interesting?
Pay close attention. Love and hatred are
Wow.
absolutely intertwined.
My goodness. If a remorse of conscience, the latter proceeding always from the sixth principle, which would be our buddhic, one of the very highest aspects of ourself, has only once been felt during the period of bliss and really spiritual love, born in the sixth and fifth. However, it may be polluted by the desires of the fourth,
Being the emotional.
kama rupa, then this remorse must survive and will accompany incessantly the scenes of pure love. Well, we're learning here that so remorse can even be in Devachan too?
Yeah,
This is
because
new.
it
We
comes
have-
from the sixth. It comes from your spiritual nature.
But that's not a
That's-
positive thing, though.
Feeling remorse is absolutely a positive thing. It's like, oh my gosh,
It's pain.
how could I do that?
Right, but it's pain.
No, but it's a strong desire to do better.
Yes. Wow. That would be a Devachanic experience to discharge that.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. This is a lot. I need not enter into details since a physiological expert as I take you to be Let me read that again. I need not enter into details, since a physiological expert, as I take you to be, need hardly have his imagination and intuitions prompted by a psychological observer of my sort.
And remember that he mentioned in a previous letter that Sinnett had a rather lively past. And I speculated that it may have been before he was married, when he was a 20-something-year-old editor in Hong Kong for a few years.
Mm-hmm. Search in the depths of your conscience and memory and try to see what scenes are likely to take their firm hold upon you. Wow.
I wish I could see those.
Wow. Well, I wonder if he's referring to in Devachan specifically.
Yeah, he's talking about Sinnett.
Yeah.
In your own life. Mm-hmm. Review your own life up to this point. See what you think is going to be some of the scenes in Devachan.
When once more in their presence you find yourself living them over again and ensnared, you will have forgotten all the rest. This letter, among other things, since in the course of events, it will come far later on in the panorama of your resurrected life. And he's saying resurrected, meaning Devachan, not his next incarnation on earth.
Right. So, again, all chronologically.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. I have no right to look into your past life. They do, though, sometimes, to test their purity and to investigate them.
I'm not sure why he said that.
A contradiction?
Maybe. No. Let's appeal to the court.
Yeah. I have no right to look into your past life. Whenever I may have caught glimpses of it, I have invariably turned my eyes away, for I have to deal with the present A.P. Sinnett, not with the ancient man.
So he's purposely avoiding it. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what he means, is that I don't give myself that right.
Yeah. We have to remember the language, even though this is English, we have to kind of read between the lines to what he's saying.
And he speaks from his cultural background. Here's another one of the contradictions. Nor can we call it a full, but only a partial remembrance. Love and hatred are the only immortal feelings, the only survivors from the wreck of the phenomenal world. Imagine yourself in Devachan, then, with those you may have loved with such immortal love, with the familiar shadowy scenes connected with them for a background, and a perfect blank for everything else relating to your interior social, political, and literary life. And that seemed perfectly logical to me.
Yes, love and hatred are the only immortal feelings. But the gradations of tones along the 7x7 scales of the whole keyboard of life are numberless.
And KH knows music, and he knows piano, because there are 7 octaves on the piano, plus 3 extra notes at the bottom. But he knows that there are 7 octaves, 7 times 7.
And since it is those two feelings, or to be correct, shall I risk being misunderstood again and say those two poles of man's soul? Oh my gosh, those poles, polarity that mold the future state of man, whether for Devachan or Avicii, then the variety of such states must also be immeasurable. Okay, this is huge because this refers to duality. Everything in the world is of a dual nature. He's talking about the soul being polarized with love and hate? Oh my God.
Well, think about the people in the world. Those are the two motivating factors in anyone's life. Love and or hatred.
At their extremes, I mean, there are gradations like he's saying, but yeah, I guess you're right.
And everybody has a combination. For some, it's like this. For others, it's like this.
That really does drive everything, doesn't it? You want something or you don't want something.
You love somebody or you hate them. And often it's the same person. A love-hate relationship. Look at the people who are just so desperately in love with someone. They get married, they have children, they live together for a while, and then what happens? Something happens and they get divorced and they become the biggest enemy that person has. I'm going to get you. You made me miserable. Well, they made themselves miserable.
You're right. I think the fact that he says the gradations, I think that is extremely important because that tells us that it's not only the extremes, though. You get out of your bed for a certain reason. It's a degree of love or hate. Yep. You start a business for a reason. It's a degree. You love something strong. It might be. Or you hate something, so you start a business, but it could be. But he says 7 gradations. But those are broken down into like there's an infinite number of degrees of love and hate, which motivate every action. I want to get a glass of water. Oh, well, I love the idea of quenching my thirst. I want that. Or I want to move away from the sunlight because it's blinding me. It's a degree of dislike, right? That's very interesting. And this motivates everything.
Remember in the past, he said the one thing that nature hates is being lukewarm. No great degree of love, no great degree of hate, just mediocrity, just
because
boredom.
That's like antithetical to manifestation. Duality requires poles. There wouldn't be a nature if everything was in the middle. There wouldn't be. We have to. This is like profound right now. This is amazing. That's why nature doesn't like that. If everything was monotone, there wouldn't be a universe.
Yeah, if everybody lived in paradise, it wouldn't be paradise. Because how do you brag that you're better than somebody?
The Big Bang wouldn't have banged if there was no friction or no polarity. There has to be something to react.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I love this one. This dude's awesome. I'm getting very excited. Okay.
Yeah. All right. The next quote. Since the conscious perception of one's personality on earth is but an evanescent dream, that sense will be equally that of a dream in the Devachan, only 100-fold intensified. Then another quote. A connoisseur who passes eons in the rapt delight of listening to divine symphonies by imaginary angelic choirs and orchestras. Now, there you've got your heaven world that some people dream about.
Right. How can you dispute the fact that music and harmony are, for a Wagner, a Paganini, the King of Bavaria, and so many other true artists and melomaniacs, like Terry, an object of the profoundest spiritual love and veneration? So there's the clarification. Now it makes sense. He's not contradicting anything.
Yes, exactly. Where's the contradiction? And the King of Bavaria was Ludwig II, who was a great lover of music, to the extent that he saved the career of Richard Wagner, who was financially destitute until he lifted him up and made him very popular in Bavaria and in all of Europe. Now come the questions 12a and 12b, which he had mentioned, KH, in the introduction to his letter giving answers. 12a, in no case then, with the exception of suicides and shells, is there any possibility for any other to be attracted to a seance room? And then 12b, on the margin, I said rarely, but I have not pronounced the word never. And KH answers them both at the same time.
Let me make sure I understand 12a.
They were talking about whether or not mediums could actually communicate with people.
Okay.
And he said they communicate with shells and rarely with actual individuals.
When answering Mr. Hume's objections, whose statistical calculations made with the evident intent of crushing our teaching, maintained that spiritualists were right and that the majority of seance room spooks were spirits, if I had only written, in no case then, with the exception of suicides and shells, and those victims of accidents who die full of some engrossing earthly passion, is there any possibility for any other, etc.? Then I would have been perfectly right as a professor to think that, eager as you are to accept doctrines that contradict physical science in some most important points, you should have consented to Mr. Hume's suggestion to split hairs over a simple omission. My dear friend, permit me to remark that simple common sense ought to have whispered to you that one who says one day, in no case then, and a few days later denies having ever pronounced the word never, is not only no adept, but must be either suffering from softening of the brain or some other, quote, accident.
People used to talk about softening of the brain when people lose their minds, but it's not a phrase you would hear very often today.
Can you put that teaching into clear language for me? So who's contacted in seances, victims or non-victims? He's saying that victims of accidents and suicides can be contacted in seance rooms,
Right.
but regular people that die cannot be contacted.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
And that's how I remember it to be. It's very challenging language here.
So most people end up being shells, and that's what the medium can contact. And it's the stupid messages that your aunt wants you to know that she is okay and she loves you.
Those are the regular people, though.
Right.
They're not really being contacted. The shell is not the person. But an accident victim or a child, they die, their lower quaternary does not dissolve.
Right.
That's why it is more of the person in a ghostly state that can be contacted.
So those people have to live in Kamaloka, what would have been their normal lifespan.
And they can be contacted.
They can be contacted, and as we learn, they can generate new karma, which is not a good thing.
And this is why most of the ghost stories we hear, they're not very kind and they're all stressed. Sometimes they want to cause problems. They're in Kamaloka. They're dealing with all the unresolved emotions and they died sometimes a violent death. It's rarely the benevolent, kind, blissful person.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
So that's the end of the contradictions and KH's answers. And now we can finish up KH's response. So KH has responded to his list of contradictions, and now he finishes up his letter.
To one sin I do plead guilty, though. And this is obviously KH talking again.
Mm-hmm.
That sin was a very acute feeling of irritation against Mr. Hume upon receiving his triumphant statistical letter. He's talking about how he's guilty for feeling irritation.
Yeah, but guess what? We found out that Moria not only feels irritated sometimes, but gets angry.
But he's saying he's guilty of it. He's so honest, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And remember, the statistics were entirely made up. Hume, out of his something or other, pulled up these imaginary statistics of how many people he thought would be able to understand this doctrine.
Had I not been irritated, perhaps I wouldn't have been guilty of the omission. This is another practical clue. If you become emotional or irate, you're going to mess up something. You're not fully conscious anymore. You got unclear. There had been a veil of irritation over your vision.
Yes, and as I noted, he got a little bit mixed up on his numbering, KH did, and I think he's pretty shaken at this point by all of the problems that Hume has caused. And he's having to be so careful with everything and has been restricted by the Mahachohan from using any of his siddhis.
This is strange that he's being punished for this. It's odd. Maybe the Mahachohan doesn't want him to waste energy on this.
That's it, because Hume is wasting an enormous amount of energy. Mm-hmm. He doesn't mind the energy being spent if it has a return.
Yeah.
But if it's just to placate Hume's ego and make him feel grander, then it's totally wasted energy.
The next sentence is also interesting. He says, "This is my karma now." And we've taught and talked about how masters don't have karma, but they can create new karma when they interact with us.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's the only time they create personal karma.
I had no business to feel irritated or lose my temper, but that letter of his was, I believe, the 7th or 8th of that kind received by me during that fortnight. And I must say, our friend has the most knavish way of using his intellect in raising the most unexpected sophisms to tickle people's nerves with that I have ever known. Under the pretext of strict logical reasoning, he will perform feigned thrusts at his antagonist, and when unable to find a vulnerable spot, is caught and exposed, he will answer in the most innocent way, Why, I did it for your own good, and you ought to feel grateful. If I were an adept, I would always know what my correspondent really meant.
We pointed out Hume is a bully.
That is extremely manipulative. Maybe some people would call it gaslighting.
Yeah, that's exactly a form
Wow.
of gaslighting.
Being an adept in some small matters, I do know what he really means, and his meaning amounts to this. Were we to divulge to him the whole of our philosophy, leaving no inconsistency unexplained, it would still do no good whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't win with this guy.
And that's the same reason why the masters don't just come out and do magic tricks all the time all over the world on the nightly news to prove to everyone that they're real. It would not work.
No.
It wouldn't work.
And they still don't believe that. Hume is trying to poke them enough that they will give him more information and that they will teach him how to do the magic.
Mm-hmm. Explain one of the inconsistencies to him, and he will find a flaw in the explanation. We all know people like this, and you can see them a mile away.
They're never, ever wrong.
Right,
Never.
right. And the only thing we can do is to kind of smile and nod, because if you start to play the game, you will lose.
Yes, that's right.
And that's where we have to practice our yogi non-reaction. Satisfy him by showing that the letter was correct after all, and he will assail the opponent for speaking too slowly or too rapidly. We all know these people. It's like, okay, he realizes that he was, so let's just find something else to argue about. Let's say, well, the way you delivered it was
Yeah, but what
not
about
right.
this?
Yeah.
What about that? You did this.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It is an impossible task, and I give it up. Let it last until everything breaks under its own weight. That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
I'll still stay. He says, I can kiss no pope's toe, forgetting that no one ever asked him to do so.
That was something that he obviously wrote in a letter to him, Hume.
Yeah, these masters never asked for their fealty. They never asked them to bend the knee like Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. They never asked for that.
No.
I can love, but I cannot worship, he tells me. They were never asked. They don't want to be worshipped.
No.
He can love no one but A.O. Hume and never has. Ooh, zing. That one could state, O Hume, gush is thy name, is shown in the following that I transcribed from one of his letters. If for no other reason, I love Moria for his entire devotion to you, and you I have always loved, even when I was most cross with you, since one is always most sensitive with those one cares about the most. Even when I was fully persuaded you were a myth, for even then my heart yearned to you, as it often does to an avowedly fictitious character. Wow.
And then this is K.H.'s comment on Hume's statement.
A sentimental Becky Sharp writing to an imaginary lover could hardly express her feelings better. So Becky Sharp's an author?
No, Becky Sharp was a character in the book Vanity Fair,
Oh.
which was very popular in England. Becky Sharp was this young woman who was a master manipulator.
Oh, wow.
She could get anything she wanted. She could manipulate men and women equally well. So, yeah, if you got involved with Becky Sharp, you were going to come out on the short end of the stick.
I will see to your scientific questions next week. I am not at home at present, but quite near to Darjeeling, in the Lamasery, the object of poor HPB's longings.
Aha, guess what? Remember how HPB was so upset when the Mahachohan told her she couldn't come to visit? They relented. He relented, apparently, and now she's going to meet them near Darjeeling.
I thought of leaving by the end of September, but find it rather difficult on account of Nobin's boy.
Nobin Banerjee was one of the signers of the protest by the chelas, and his 14-year-old son had been accepted as a novice at one of the monasteries.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Most likely, I will have to interview the old lady in my own skin if Moria brings her here. Interview her? That's weird. And he has to bring her or lose her forever, at least as far as the physical triad is concerned.
Yeah.
She's going to die if she doesn't go there.
Yeah, she's been in seriously poor health for several years now. And it's getting worse. And all of this nastiness with Hume and other people isn't helping.
And now, goodbye. I ask you again, do not frighten my little man. He may prove useful to you someday, but do not forget he is only an appearance. Yours, K.H.
Now, the letter was delivered, both the objections and K.H.'s response were delivered by these two chelas, Darbagiri Nath and Kusho Chandra. We'll find out more about that because it's quite intriguing. But that was who delivered this letter to Sinnett. So that's the end of this exciting episode.
Wow.
So we keep learning so much good information.
The saga continues.
But you can see why K.H. did not want all of these letters just published as a book, because you'll find out in one of the upcoming letters, he said, I don't have the time to go through and edit all of this information. And without the editing, it's not going to be much use. So we got the raw materials, but without an editor to make it more condensed and more understandable, it really is very difficult to get any use out of it. Hopefully, what we're doing solves that problem, at least to some extent, and will give some other theosophists and students inspiration to take up the task and refine it even more.
It does. I just love the fact that we're correlating things from different letters so it makes coherent sense to us.
Well, it's definitely a start. So I, for one, have learned a lot from just the process of putting this together. And I am eternally grateful to these two Mahatmas for not giving up on the project.
We're grateful to you for making it understandable.
I do what I can. It's in my contract. All right. Well, that's enough for today. And my gosh, are we really going to be on session 50 next time? That is amazing. All right. Well, thank you for coming along with us on this journey. We appreciate all of your views and hope that we are not disappointing you.